oceanographer Tom's family, his wife Juliet and their children, Cassie and Ben, embark on a luxury yacht trip in the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben are fishing, and Cassie is engrossed in her gadget, Julia decides to swim. Suddenly, an unsettling feeling grips her, as though a massive, unseen danger is circling her. Despite the calm waters, a sense of dread builds. Meanwhile, the yacht's instruments malfunction, but Tom is too focused on fishing to notice. Julia's anxiety grows, and she starts to drown, screaming for help, though her family doesn't hear her over the water's eerie pull. Finally, Tom hears Julia's cries. He and the children rush to save her. He rushed to the helm and the yacht headed away. Tom dived into the water with the children, helped them pull her aboard and revive her, pulling her back aboard the yacht just in time. Tom was angry because he always asked swimmers to warn others when they went into the water underwater. Julia apologized. Although shaken, the family quickly moves on from the incident, especially since they are celebrating Ben's 13th birthday. They light candles and take happy family photos. As Cassie talks to her boyfriend on the phone about the day's events, an unexpected, intense storm looms in the distance. Cassie expresses concern, but her boyfriend reassures her before the call drops. Suddenly, strange jolts rock the yacht. The family rushes to the deck to find massive whale carcasses floating eerily around them, posing a threat to the yacht's stability. Tom explains that storms sometimes disorient whales, but something is wrong. They're pushing the yacht dangerously. Tom dives into the water but returns injured, suspecting the yacht's shafts were damaged by a tail strike. Now, they can't sail away easily. Julia stitches up Tom's wound as the family assesses their situation. Cassie tries to restore communication, but the yacht has no signal. The radio is also dead. Tom calculates they have enough fresh water for 4 days, and since they're near a shipping route, he hopes for a rescue. However, strange sounds from outside interrupt their thoughts. When the family steps onto the deck, they witness glowing objects falling from the sky, closer and closer. In a desperate attempt, Tom restarts the engine and narrowly avoids being struck by the next object. As they realize the falling objects are artificial satellites, a powerful wind strikes, and the yacht's instruments go haywire. The terrified family takes shelter inside the yacht as it's violently tossed by waves. They brace for the worst, hearing a mysterious ringing sound that causes nosebleeds and nausea. Tom fires a flare gun to signal for help, but it's futile. After a harrowing night, the family is relieved to survive until morning, but their ordeal is far from over. The family survives, but there's a massive hole in the side of the yacht. Strangely, it's still afloat. When they step outside, they're shocked. The ocean has completely vanished, and their boat is now perched on a rocky outcrop in the middle of a barren desert where the sea once was. Tom tries to calm the family, assuring them that not everyone could have perished. As he takes measurements, he discovers the compass is malfunctioning. North isn't where it should be. He realizes the Earth's magnetic poles have shifted, a phenomenon that has happened in Earth's ancient history. This shift explains why the sea has retreated, leaving land exposed. Tom fears most of humanity might have been wiped out. Cassie, overwhelmed by this revelation, retreats to the cabin for some solitude, while Julia inventories the remaining supplies. Ben, hoping for a miracle, releases colorful balloons into the sky as a distress signal, praying that other survivors might find them. Tom sends out a distress call on the radio, and against all odds, receives a response. It's from Nato, the captain of a small submersible. He explains that they survived because they were deep underwater when the catastrophe occurred, but most communication systems have failed, making it nearly impossible to expect outside help. Based on Nato's calculations, the sea will return in about a week, but it will be brutal. His advice is clear. The family must find higher ground before the waters rush back. Julia quickly instructs the children to pack their belongings. Tom, desperate to save his family, directly asks Nato if he can rescue the children. Nato explains that his submersible is tiny and can only take one person. However, after some persuasion, Nato agrees to take both kids. Tom provides their coordinates, and the family prepares to make the treacherous journey to reach the submersible's location, which Tom estimates will take a couple of days. The next morning, as the family is nearly ready to set off, Tom steps onto the deck and sees a mysterious man with a dog approaching. As Tom greets him, he notices the man is injured. Offering him water, Tom is caught off guard when the traveler suddenly punches him in the face. Julia rushes to her husband's aid, but the stranger plunges a makeshift weapon into Tom's chest. The dog keeps Julia at bay, while she stands frozen in horror. Realizing there is no way to save her husband, Julia sprints back to the yacht as the attacker pursues her, injuring her arm. Despite the pain, she climbs aboard, screaming for help. Hearing her, Cassie and Ben rush to her side, and together, they barricade the cabin doors. Julia quickly hides the children in a locker, giving Cassie the flare gun with strict instructions to use it only as a last resort. Meanwhile, the intruder breaks through the doors and begins searching the yacht. Julia, injured but determined, hides in the back bathroom, tending to her wound. The attacker, clearly famished, heads to the galley for food. After grabbing a can, he starts searching the yacht more thoroughly. Julia, arming herself with a kitchen knife, hides beneath the boat by jumping overboard. The killer peers through the hole in the yacht, but doesn't spot her. However, his dog attacks Julia, forcing her to kill it. Hearing the dog's yelp, the attacker steps outside and discovers the dog's lifeless body. While he's distracted, Julia climbs back onto the yacht through a porthole on the opposite side, but falls straight into the killer's hands. He beats her, throwing her onto the couch and gripping her throat, trying to strangle her. Cassie, witnessing the attack, knows it's time for the last resort. She opens the locker and fires the flare gun at the man, injuring him. The flare, however, ignites the yacht. As the fire spreads, Julia orders the children to flee. Injured but determined, the killer tries to attack again. Julia kicks him away, grabs their pack bags, and jumps overboard. Outside, Ben finds his father's body. Cassie, heartbroken, rushes to it, sobbing over her father's lifeless form. Julia kisses her deceased husband, but realizes they must leave. The killer leaps from the burning yacht as it explodes, forcing Julia and the children to flee across the barren desert. They find temporary shelter in a rocky canyon with a small stream, but the water is salty and undrinkable. Cassie shares the last drops of water with Ben, but he refuses, guilt-ridden, believing the killer arrived because of the balloons he released earlier. Cassie, sharing his guilt, begins to blame him too. Julia quickly stops the argument, defending her son and urging them to gather their strength for the journey ahead. Suddenly, she spots the killer still pursuing them. As night falls, Ben stumbles upon the carcass of a hammerhead shark and tries to butcher it for food, but Julia sees the killer approaching and orders the children to run. They soon reach a field littered with toxic waste barrels from the now flooded ocean, but they have no choice but to move forward despite the contamination threat. With the killer relentlessly chasing them, they navigate the former ocean floor, now filled with plastic and trash dumped by humans over the years. Ben becomes dangerously dehydrated, and Julia gives him the last drops of water. Cassie, overwhelmed, breaks down, convinced they won't survive, but Julia commands them to keep moving. Finally, they find the wreckage of a plane that had crashed into the sea long ago and crawl inside the fuselage to rest. Inside, Julia gazes at the last family photo, recounting the story of how she first met Tom. He had been brought to her hospital after suffering decompression sickness from a failed dive. The children weep as they say their final goodbyes to their father. In the middle of the night, Cassie is awakened by a strange noise and footsteps approaching their hiding place. Cassie sits outside near the plane wreckage, seemingly vulnerable. Out of the darkness, the killer approaches, unaware that she is acting as bait. Just as he prepares to grab her, Julia ambushes him, stabbing him with a knife. At dawn, the family gets ready to resume their journey, only to discover that the killer's body has been scavenged, an ominous sign that something more dangerous than humans lurks in the desert. As they move forward, Julia consults the map, but Ben suddenly rushes ahead toward a salty puddle, desperate for water. Despite Julia's shouts, he takes a few gulps before she pulls him away. Shortly after, he becomes sick. They stumble across some plastic chairs and use them to build a makeshift shelter from the scorching sun. While resting, Julia hears strange, unsettling sounds. Realizing they're in danger, she quickly wakes the children, and they start running. In the distance, they spot a large, stranded ship surrounded by crashed shipping containers and a few wandering survivors. Julia calls out to them for help, but they ignore her warnings, racing into a container and locking the doors. It becomes clear why. They are being pursued by thousands of giant crabs. Julia, Cassie, and Ben climb onto a container to escape, but the crabs manage to wound Julia in the leg. From their vantage point, they watch helplessly as the crabs penetrate the locked container, killing everyone inside despite their frantic attempts to defend themselves. Julia ties the scarf around her wounded leg and passes out. The next morning, Julia wakes up alone and terrified, calling for her children. She soon discovers that the crabs have moved on, and Cassie and Ben had gone down to search for food and weapons. While Julia cauterizes her wound, Ben examines the found weapons, and they scavenge the containers for supplies. Among the belongings of one of the deceased, Julia finds a radio and contacts Nato. He responds, explaining that he was also attacked by deep-sea arthropods. Based on his observations, the sea will return soon, which explains why these creatures have surfaced. Julia begs Nato to save her children, but she's unsure of where to go after losing their map. Firing a flare, Ben spots the direction, and the family rushes toward it. Soon, they see Nato's yellow submarine in the distance, but the rough terrain of the exposed seabed makes the journey difficult. Cassie grows frustrated with Julia's constant talk about saving the children, but Julia refuses to answer, determined to push them forward. As they trek through a canyon contaminated with toxic waste, a sudden rock slide separates Julia from the children. Despite Cassie's hesitation, Julia pleads with her daughter to save Ben. Reluctantly, Cassie agrees, and she and Ben manage to escape the canyon and reach the submarine. But when they enter, it's eerily empty, until suddenly, Nato appears. As Nato, badly wounded, emerges from behind the submarine, he admits that his chances of survival are slim. He orders Cassie and Ben to board the vessel, but Cassie, determined to save her mother, races back to help Julia, who is barely fending off the approaching crabs. With her ammunition nearly depleted, Julia fights desperately. Cassie climbs over the rock barrier, extending her hand just in time. Together, they manage to reach the submarine moments before the crabs overrun the area, their claws claiming Nato as their next victim. Once aboard, the family braces as a massive ocean wave suddenly appears on the horizon. The powerful surge lifts the submarine, dragging it across the jagged rocks. As Julia watches, memories of the past few days flash before her eyes, and she passes out from exhaustion. When Julia regains consciousness, she finds the submarine at a standstill. Opening the hatch, the family emerges to a shocking sight. They have been carried to a ruined city, now submerged and devastated by the returning ocean. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Leave a comment about your favorite movie, and we will make it next. Thanks for watching.